My name is Holden Thorpe, and I am 75 years old. At my age, people usually think of the past more often than they think of the future. But I'm not the kind of old man who wallows in nostalgia and quietly lives out his life. Too much is still simmering inside me. Too many bills left unpaid. One in particular, with my only son Louis and his wife Royna. I have lived a life that most would call successful. Served as a district attorney in Seattle for 32 years. I've seen crimes that the average person would never dream of. I learned to recognize lies by the tiniest eye movement, the faintest tremor in the voice, the way a person swallows after a question. This ability helped me put hundreds of criminals behind bars, and it's also helped me realize that my own son can't wait for me to die. My Eleanor died 8 years ago. Pancreatic cancer is a merciless killer that doesn't stand a chance. She was dying before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to help her. 47 years together, and suddenly there was nothing. Empty in the house, empty in life, empty inside. Louis came to the funeral, of course. He stood stone-faced, clutching Rowena's shoulder as she squeezed out tears for the audience. They flew out the next day. Urgent business at the firm, Louis said. Urgent matters were always found when it came to me. After Eleanor's death, I immersed myself in my memoirs, writing down stories from my practice, trying to make sense of what justice means in a world where truth so rarely wins. I guess it was my way of coping with grief. Louis called once a month, asking about my health as if he hoped to hear bad news. There was no sincerity in his voice, only impatience. The impatience of an heir. My villa in the suburbs of Seattle, on a hill overlooking Puget Sound Bay, is something I built with my own hands. Not literally, of course, but every stone, every beam, every inch of this house was paid for by my labor. My sleepless nights over cases, my fight for justice. 3 floors, 7 bedrooms, a library with a collection of rare forensic books, a wine cellar with bottles I'd collected over decades. It was all meant to be a legacy for Louis, an extension of my name. I realize now that to him it was just real estate to sell. A year ago, just before Christmas, Louis and Royna paid me a visit. It happens once a year, no more. A formality, a tribute to propriety. We sat in the living room, drinking cognac from crystal glasses given to me by the State Attorney General on my 60th birthday. "How's your health, Father?" Louis asked, looking around the room. His eyes lingered on the Cyrus Evans painting that Eleanor and I had bought at the auction in 2005. "It's fine for my age," I replied. "My blood pressure is a little high, but it's nothing serious." I noticed the way he looked at Rowena. Disappointment. That's what I saw in their eyes. Disappointment that the old man was still hanging on. "You look tired," Rowena said, fixing her perfectly styled blonde hair. "Maybe you should think about hiring a nurse, or move into a care home for the elderly. This mansion is too big for one person." "It's too high maintenance," Louis said. "You're not getting any younger, Dad, and the value of properties like this in this neighborhood is only going up. It's a good time to sell." I took a sip of cognac, feeling the bitterness in my mouth as well as in my soul. "I'm not going to die or sell the house yet," I said, "but thank you for your concern." The irony in my voice was obvious, but they pretended not to notice. Louis stood up and walked over to the fireplace, looking at the pictures on the mantelpiece. Eleanor and I on vacation in Italy. Louis in his law school graduate robe. Our family when we were still a family. "Is this device new?" he asked, pointing to a small black box above the fireplace. "Smart home system," I answered. "It helps with lighting, temperature, security. You know, at my age, you have to keep up with the times so you don't turn into a helpless old man." Actually, it was one of the security cameras I had installed around the house. After 40 years as a prosecutor, paranoia becomes your middle name. I've seen how easily people break into people's homes, how quickly lives are ruined because of someone's greed. 6 exterior cameras, 14 interior cameras, all connected to a server in my office and an app on my phone and tablet. I can monitor my house from anywhere in the world that has internet. Not that I expect anyone to break into my house. But I've always been cautious, and that caution has saved me from trouble more than once. Their visit lasted exactly 2 hours. "They refused dinner, a restaurant reservation," Rowena explained. Louis patted me on the shoulder with such fake warmth that I wanted to shake his hand off. "Take care of yourself, Father," he said, "and think about what we said about the house. At your age, such a large property is a burden, not a pleasure." I watched them get into their brand new Lexus. Rowena pulled out a mirror, checked her makeup. Louis started the engine, and they drove off without looking back. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. I tossed and turned in the bed I'd once shared with Eleanor, thinking about how she and I had dreamed of the future, about how proud we'd been of Louis when he'd followed in my footsteps and gone to law school, about how our relationship had gradually cooled, imperceptibly at first, then more and more obviously, about how he introduced me to Royna, a cold, calculating woman with ambition but no talent. Louis works in a corporate law firm doing mergers and acquisitions. He makes good money, but never feels it's enough. Rowena once dreamed of opening an art gallery, but instead runs someone else's, selling mediocre paintings to rich clients who don't know anything about art. They live in an expensive house they can't afford, drive cars they can't afford, wear clothes that cost as much as the average American's monthly salary, and waiting for me to die so they can get what I've earned in a lifetime. The morning after they left, I met with my lawyer and made the first changes to my will. Not drastic, not yet, just a little insurance against greed. I'd never been a naive person, and years in the prosecutor's office had taught me to anticipate the worst in people, even in my own son. 6 months have passed since then. I continued to write my memoirs, went for walks by the bay, and occasionally met up with former coworkers. Louis called with the same regularity, once a month, always on Sundays, always for exactly 15 minutes. Sometimes I'd turn on the tape of our conversations, reread the transcripts afterward, conversations about nothing, empty words, fake concern. One evening I was looking through old photo albums. Louis at 5 years old on the beach, building a sandcastle. Louis at 12, proudly holding his first debate victory trophy. Louis at 18 admitted to Stanford. His eyes were not yet clouded with greed back then. What happened? When did he go from a boy I was proud of to a man I hardly recognize? Perhaps it was my own fault. Too much work, too little time at home. Eleanor always said I demanded too much of Louis, that my standards were unattainable. Maybe he's just tired of trying to live up to my expectations. Or maybe it was Rowena's influence. She's always looked at me as an obstacle, like an old man who's been taking up space that rightfully belongs to them for too long. There are 120 windows in my house, and sometimes I feel like death is staring at me through every one of them. Not with anger or threat, just with patient expectation. I'm not afraid to die. After so many years of working with violence and crime, death seems just another passage, another door to open. But I'm afraid that everything I've created, everything I've believed in, will go to people who don't appreciate or deserve it. Every night before I go to bed, I check the security cameras. I walk around the house virtually, room by room. Everything's in place. Everything is under control. I'm used to solitude, used to silence. But sometimes, on particularly dark nights, I remember Eleanor, her laughter, her hand in my arm, and the silence becomes unbearable. That's when I turn on the old tapes. I have video of our trip to Paris for our 40th wedding anniversary. I have audio of our conversations on the veranda on summer evenings. It doesn't bring comfort, but it reminds me that I was once happy, that I once had a family that loved me. And now all I have left are memories and a home too big for one person, but too precious to give to those who are just waiting for me to end. The heart attack happened on Thursday. I was returning from my morning walk when I felt a heaviness in my chest. At first I thought it was just fatigue after all. I had walked almost 2 kilometers. But when the pain started radiating to my left arm, I realized it was serious. Luckily, my neighbor Eric Palmer was trimming the hedges. He saw me slumped against the fence and called an ambulance. I remember the siren wailing. I remember the paramedics asking questions, checking my pulse, hooking up some sensors. I remember the cold metal of the stretcher and the feeling of my lungs being squeezed by an invisible press. And then I collapsed. I woke up in the hospital room to the monotonous beeping of the heart monitor. "Mr. Thorpe, can you hear me?" A young nurse in a light blue uniform leaned over me. "You're at Providence Hospital. You had a heart attack, but you're stable now." I wanted to ask how serious it was, but my throat was sore from the intubation tube, which had obviously only recently been removed. I just nodded. "Sure, Mom." "Dr. Chen will be here shortly," she said, checking the vitals on the monitor. "Get some rest. Resting in a hospital is an oxymoron. Every 2 hours, someone comes in to take your blood pressure, temperature, draw blood, or just wake you up to make sure you're still alive. Privacy is another myth. After 40 years in the legal profession, where confidentiality was sacrosanct, being in a place where anyone in a white coat could walk in and see you at your most vulnerable was especially humbling. Toward evening, Dr. Chen, a short man with attentive eyes behind the panes of his thin-rimmed glasses, came in. "Myocardial infarction, Mr. Thorpe," he said without preamble. "Not a major one, but still a serious one. We were able to restore blood flow through the coronary artery with a stent. You're lucky to have gotten help so quickly. When can I go home?" The hoarse voice was barely recognizable. Dr. Chen looked at the chart. "At least 4 days of observation. Then, if there are no complications, we'll discharge you with prescriptions. Do you have someone to help you for the first time?" I shook my head. "I live alone, but I can manage. Onranatunimon. At your age and with your diagnosis, I don't recommend being left unattended." The doctor frowned. "We can offer the services of a nurse or consider a rehabilitation center for the first time." "I'm fine without that," I answered more firmly than I should have. The thought of a stranger in my house was unbearable. "Whatever you say," Dr. Chen shrugged, "but discuss it with your family. By the way, your son came by while you were unconscious. He said he'll be back tomorrow." Lewis came? It was unexpected. Usually he can't get out of the office, even during office hours, but he dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. The next morning, a nurse helped me with the first steps to the bathroom, a humbling experience for a man who had prided himself on his independence all his life. Then there was breakfast, tasteless oatmeal and unsweetened tea that I don't even want to talk about. At 10, they brought pills, a whole set of colorful pills. At 11, a woman from the social service came in, again talking about foster care. I refused, though not so confidently. Hospital helplessness was sapping my resolve. Louis and Royna showed up after lunch. I heard their voices from the hallway before they even entered the room. "The doctor says he's stable, but it's serious for his age," Louis said. "There could be complications." "We have to bring up the house," Rowena said in a low voice. "He won't be able to live there alone after this. This is our chance." I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. They came in, and I heard Rowena sigh theatrically. "Tonotum, poor father," she said with a fake compassion that would have fooled anyone but a 30-year prosecutor. "He looks so fragile." I decided to wake up. Slowly, I opened my eyes, turned my head. "Louis, Rowena, I didn't expect to see you." "Father!" Louis approached the bed, a mask of worry on his face. "How are you feeling? We were so worried." "Alive for now." I tried to sit up, but the movement made my chest ache again. "Careful." Rowena adjusted the pillow behind me, her slender fingers with perfect manicures flickering before my eyes. "You have to take care of yourself." "What did the doctor say?" Louis asked, taking a seat in the chair next to the bed. "Prognosis? They'll discharge me in 4 days if everything's okay." I saw them look at each other. Disappointment, relief. It's hard to say. "And then what?" Louis continued. "You don't think you can go back to that huge house by yourself after having a heart attack, do you?" Here it is. Not 5 minutes later, and already we're talking about the house. "I can handle it," I said firmly. "I always have." "It's irresponsible, Father." Rona shook her head. Her blonde hair was in a flawless bun, her business suit fitting perfectly. "Oh no, after an attack like that, you need constant supervision. Possible second heart attack, complications. What do you suggest?" I looked her in the eye. I always thought that she had a cold look, like some witnesses on the bench who calculate every word in advance. "There are several options," Louis intervened. "A nursing home with medical care. Or you could sell the villa and buy an apartment in a complex for the elderly, with all the amenities and medical staff." "A nursing home?" I almost laughed, but stopped when I felt a pain in my chest. "I'm 75, not 95, and I'm sane." "No one's saying you're not sane." Rowena touched my hand in a soothing gesture. Her fingers were cold. "Fuasum, it's just that taking care of a house this big is stressful, and you can't be stressed. Besides, it's worth a fortune. Selling it would solve a lot of issues." "Like what?" I raised an eyebrow. "Well, like paying medical bills." Louis spread his hands. "Good care homes aren't cheap. And also, Well, Rowena and I have financial obligations too. A house, a car, a country club membership. That's it. I'm finally coming clean. They need the money, and I've been living too long. My insurance covers my medical bills, I replied calmly. And as for your financial obligations, those are your obligations, not mine. Dad, Lewis leaned closer, his voice softer, as if he were talking to a child. We just want you to be safe and get the care you need. Think about it. Selling the house now, while the market is booming, would be a smart move. We could find you a cozy apartment where you don't have to climb stairs, where there's a concierge And where would the rest of the money from the sale go? I interrupted. My villa is worth about $6 million at today's prices. Rowena coughed. Well, some of it could be invested to ensure your comfort for the rest of your life. And part of it, perhaps, redistribute it now. A tentative inheritance, so to speak. I looked at them and didn't recognize them. My son and his wife sitting at the bedside of a nearly dead man, discussing how to divide his estate. I felt a sharp pain, not physical but mental. We're just trying to help, Lewis added, seeing my silence. After such a shock, you need to think about the future. My future or your future? I asked quietly. There was an awkward pause. Rowena was the first to break the silence. We should go. She stood up. You need rest. Think about our offer, Holden. We care for you. She said the last sentence as if she were an actress in an audition, trying to impress the director. I almost expected her to bow. Yeah, get some rest. Louis stood up too. We'll stop by tomorrow. Oh, I almost forgot. We need to get some documents from your office. Will, insurance policies, house papers, just in case. The key is on the keychain with the Eiffel Tower on it in the top drawer of the bedroom dresser. I lied, watching his reaction carefully. I actually had the key with me in the nightstand next to the bed. Next to the bed? Great, Lewis nodded. Don't worry, we'll make it neat. When they left, I lay there for a long time staring at the ceiling. Something told me they weren't going to stop with the documents in my office. The whole house would be searched, every drawer, every closet. They would appraise, inventory, plan what to sell and what to keep. The nurse brought the evening meds, helped me to the bathroom and back. When she left, I pulled the clipboard Louis had brought me yesterday from the nightstand. One of the rare gestures of attention from him. Though I suspected now that the gesture wasn't so much a gesture of concern as a way to make sure I didn't get bored in the hospital and suddenly decide to come home early. I was checking my email when a notification came in from the video surveillance system. Motion detected, main hallway, 21 hours and 15 minutes. It was followed by another, motion detected, study, 21 hours and 23 minutes. My fingers trembled as I opened the camera app. An image of my office appeared on the screen. Lewis was methodically going through the papers in his desk drawers, and Rowena was standing next to me with a phone in her hand, taking pictures of the papers. Did you find anything? She asked. Just old tax returns. Lewis slammed the drawer shut. He probably keeps important documents in a safe. Where's the safe? I have no idea. Dad's always been secretive. I switched to another camera. In the bedroom. The top drawer of the dresser was pulled out. Things were in disarray. They were already looking for the key I supposedly left behind. Went back to the cell in the study. Lewis was examining the bookshelves. Maybe behind one of the books, like in the movies? Rowena suggested, opening the cabinet where I kept old files. I don't think so. Father's not that trivial. Louis shook his head. But we'll find it. We've got time. How much do you think he has in his accounts? Rowena went through the folders in the closet. At least $1 million, Louis answered. Oh, plus investments, stocks, and the house. If you sold it all, it'd be a good sum. We need the money, Louis. Rowena's voice had a hard edge to it. You promised we'd pay off the debts as soon as we got the inheritance, and now he can live another 10 years. He won't live 10 years, Louis turned to her. You heard the doctor. One heart attack usually leads to another, especially at his age. I froze. My son was actually discussing my imminent death as a business plan. And if he didn't, Rowena insisted, if he lasted another 5 years or 7, the debt collectors wouldn't wait that long. Neither would the bank. We have options. Louis stepped up to her and put his hands on her shoulders. If he agrees to sell the house, we can convince him to give us some of the money now. If not, it might be time to consider a declaration of incapacity. There can be cognitive impairment after a heart attack. I could become his guardian and manage his finances. Would that work? Rowena's voice has a bit of interest in it. It could. I'd have to consult a family law attorney. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. Incapacitated? Guardianship? My own son planning to deprive me of the right to dispose of what I'd earned over a lifetime? They continued to search the office, then moved into the living room. I switched between cameras, watching them look through my house like a museum where every piece had already been mentally appraised and sold. At one point, Rowena stopped in front of a Cyrus Evans painting. "I'm going to keep this one," she said, touching the frame. "It would fit perfectly in the living room." "Of course, darling." Louis put his arm around her waist. "Chinmanam, all of this will be ours soon. All we need is a little patience." I turned off the tablet, unable to watch anymore. The pain in my chest returned, but now it wasn't a physical pain. It was the realization of betrayal, deep and unforgivable. All my life I'd fought criminals, seen the worst of human nature, but never had I thought that the closest person would be capable of such cold calculation. The room was quiet, only the beeping of the monitor breaking the silence. Dusk was fading outside the window, and I was growing in my soul. I couldn't let them take what was mine. If they want war, they'll get it. After all, I'd spent my life fighting people far more dangerous than my greedy son and his greedy wife. I pressed the nurse's call button. I needed sleeping pills. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day, and I needed a good night's sleep to think through my next move. The third day in the hospital dragged on for an excruciatingly long time. Nurses were changing, IVs were changing one after another. Doctors were coming in for rounds, mumbling something about positive, dynamics, and satisfactory indicators. But my thoughts were far away from the hospital room. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen on the security cameras yesterday. Louis and Royna came by this afternoon, talking about their plans to help me after I was discharged, talking about nursing homes as enthusiastically as if they were advertising a five-star hotel. I nodded, pretending to listen, but inside I was seething with anger, especially when Rowena asked me in between where I kept the collector's wine that Eleanor and I had collected over 30 years. "Oh, just to know it doesn't have to be moved when you clean it," she explained with fake concern. "In the wine cellar," I replied. "Under lock and key. I'm the only one with the key." Louis frowned. "Isn't that a little paranoid, Father? Keeping wine under lock and key in your own house?" "Paranoid is someone who doesn't know all the facts," I answered, looking him straight in the eye. "I know them enough to be careful." They left after an hour, promising to stop by tomorrow. I noticed that Rowena had left her scarf on the nightstand, a thin silk scarf with a small floral pattern. An accident or an excuse to come back if I needed to? By late afternoon, I was feeling better. I even made it to the lobby on my own and back, without the nurse's help. The night duty nurse, Mrs. Patterson, a woman in her 50s with a tired but kind face, brought me tea and medicine. "Samo, how are you today, Mr. Thorpe?" she asked, checking the drip. "Better," I tried to smile. "Tell me, Mrs. Patterson, how long have you been working with cardiac patients?" 23 years, she said with a touch of pride. "I've seen a lot of things. And a lot of people don't survive an attack like mine?" She looked at me with professional severity. "Don't think about it, Mr. Thorpe. Your vitals are good. Your stent is in place. You'll outlive all of us." If she only knew how disappointing that would have been for my family. When she left, I pulled out my tablet and opened the security camera app. Just a routine check before bed. I didn't expect to see what I discovered. The main entrance of my villa was lit up, with several expensive cars parked in the driveway. The internal cameras showed that the house was full of people, at least 20. There was music playing in my living room, glasses clinking, laughter. Louis and Rowena were having a party, at my house, while I was in the hospital having a heart attack. I switched between cameras, unable to believe my eyes. In the living room, Rowena was accepting compliments from two young women dressed in what is now apparently considered business style. I recognized one of them as Crystal, the assistant manager at the art gallery where Rowena worked. The second one looked familiar too, probably another coworker. In the dining room, men in suits with loosened ties were discussing something, gesticulating vigorously. Lewis's colleagues from the law firm, no doubt. One of them, a balding man with a sharp profile, was the senior partner, Nigel Price. I'd met him at Christmas dinner last year, where I'd been invited more out of courtesy than out of a desire to see him. The camera in the second-floor hallway showed a young couple staggering up the stairs. The man whispered something in the woman's ear, and she giggled. They were heading for the bedrooms. Bastards, I muttered, feeling my pulse quicken. Walking back towards the living room, I saw Louis leading a group of guests towards the bar. And now, gentlemen, he said with a broad smile, let me present to you the collection my father has been collecting for 30 years. A Bordeaux from the 89th year, a Barolo from the 96th, several bottles of Chateau d'Yquem from different years. A real treasure. I froze. The wine cellar was under lock and key, but apparently the lock was no obstacle to them. The cellar chamber confirmed my fears. The wine cabinet door was cracked open, several shelves empty. They had found the collection Eleanor and I had amassed over a lifetime, bottle by bottle, memory by memory. Walking back to the living room, I saw Louis pouring dark red wine into glasses. Try this, Nigel, he said, holding out a glass to his senior partner. It's a 95-year-old Chateau Margaux. My father saved it for a special occasion. I remembered that bottle. Eleanor and I had bought it the year Louis was born, planning to open it for his wedding. We did, but I kept one bottle for Eleanor and I's golden wedding anniversary, which we never celebrated. Nigel took a sip, squeezed his eyes shut in pleasure. Divine. Your father knew wine. He did and he does, Louis corrected him. He's still alive, though not quite well. Not for long, according to Dr. Chen's prognosis. Nigel took another sip. I hope you don't mind my being blunt. We're all friends here. Not at all, Louis shrugged. I'm a realist. My father lived a long life. Now, I think it's time to give a tour of the house to those who are new here. I couldn't believe my ears. A tour? My house? Like it's a museum and not private property? For the next 2 hours, I watched as guests wandered through every room, including the ones I always kept closed. A young couple I saw coming up the stairs found themselves in the guest bedroom, in a very compromising situation. 2 women were trying on Eleanor's fur coat in front of the large mirror in our bedroom. Someone had broken a crystal vase in the hallway, and Rowena just shrugged, saying it didn't matter. Things would soon change around here anyway. The climax came when Louis led a group of guests into my office, the Holy of Holies, a place I rarely invited anyone to. This is the old man's den, he announced, turning on the lights. Note these prehistoric legal volumes. Who even uses paper books nowadays? The guests laughed, looking around curiously. And what are these awards? One of the women asked, pointing to the display case where I kept my professional accomplishments. Oh, my father was an old-school prosecutor. Louis walked over to the display case. Distinguished service to justice, distinguished service, blah, 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 blah. All of this was just for sitting in his chair for 30 years and following the rules. Unlike us, said one of his colleagues. We know our way around the system. Another burst of laughter. Look at this. Nigel picked up a framed photograph from the table. Is that your mother? A beautiful woman. Yeah, Louis glanced at the photo. It's a shame she didn't live to see it. She understood the importance of enjoying life, unlike my father, who was always obsessed with rules and responsibility. I gritted my teeth. Eleanor had never been frivolous. She was kind, cheerful, loved life, but always remained a responsible person. Louis was twisting her memory to justify his behavior. What's going to happen to the house? Someone asked. When, you know. We'll sell it, of course, Louis replied, sipping wine from my favorite glass. It's a museum piece, not a place to live. Royna and I are thinking about a penthouse downtown, or maybe a villa on the coast. Hurry up with your decision, Nigel interjected. The market is booming. If you can sell within a year, you'll make a fortune. I hope my father doesn't take too long. Louis grinned, and everyone laughed again. I turned the sound off. I couldn't hear it anymore, but kept watching them walk around my office, touching my things, laughing at my life. At one point, Rona walked over to a safe, cleverly disguised as an ordinary bookcase. What's in here? She asked, tapping the shelf. My father's stash, Louis answered. It's where he keeps the will, the deeds to the house, the insurance policies. We haven't found a way to open it yet. It's no big deal, Nigel said. After he After he's gone, we can call in a specialist or just open it. I don't think there's anything in there that could hurt you. He'd been wrong. In the safe was not only the will, but also a folder with evidence of questionable transactions Louis had made over the years. I had started gathering this information when I suspected my son was overstepping the bounds of the law in his practice. I didn't think it would ever come in handy, but now it has. The party went on until 3 in the morning. I watched as the guests gradually dispersed, as Louis and Rowena said goodbye to the last of them at the front door. I watched them, finally alone, hugging in the middle of my living room, pleased with themselves. "Great night," Rowena said, kissing Louis. Everyone was thrilled. "You bet," Louis smiled smugly. "Such a house, such wine. Too bad we'll have to sell it all. I'd keep the wine cellar." "Don't be greedy," Rowena poked him playfully in the chest. "We need money, not wine." "I know," Louis sighed. "The debts won't go away on their own. But once we get the inheritance, if Dr. Chen is right, it will be soon." Rowena pulled him toward the stairs. "Let's sleep in your parents' bedroom. The bed is more comfortable there." I turned off the tablet, unable to look any further. The pain in my chest returned, but it wasn't a physical pain. It was the pain of betrayal, deep and burning. All night I couldn't sleep. My thoughts swirled like birds of prey over one idea: revenge. I couldn't let them get away with it. I couldn't let them abuse Eleanor's memory, my life, everything I had created and protected. In the morning, when the nurse came in with the medication, I asked for paper and pen. "I want to write something down before I forget," I explained. She brought a pad of paper and a ballpoint pen. I thanked her, and as soon as she came out, I started writing. Not a memoir, no. A plan of action. The first item was, contact Richard Farnsworth, my old friend and former police detective. If anyone could help me gather evidence on my own son, it was him. The second was to find a new lawyer to change the will. My current one, Stuart Green, I'd known for too long. He was a friend of the family and might have let Louis slip. The third was to prepare evidence of my heir's misbehavior. CCTV footage would be a good start, but I needed more. I needed to find evidence of their financial problems, their debts, perhaps even Louis's illegal actions in his law practice. Fourth was to devise a plan to use it all against them without arousing suspicion until I was ready to strike. I wrote, crossed out, wrote again. By lunchtime, I had a rough plan of action. When Louis and Rowena showed up after lunch with guilty smiles and a box of chocolates, I greeted them with as much fake cordiality as they greeted me. "How are you, Father?" Louis asked. "You look more awake." "Feeling better," I smiled. "The doctor said it would be safe to go home the day after tomorrow." They looked at each other. "Are you sure you're ready?" Rowena put her hand on my shoulder. "Wouldn't it be better to have a couple more days of observation?" "No," I said firmly. "I want to go home, to my house." "Of course," Louis agreed hastily. "We'll make all the arrangements. By the way, we stopped by yesterday, watered the flowers, checked to make sure everything was okay." "Chuinoran, that's nice of you." I looked him straight in the eye. "I hope everything's okay in the house?" "Perfectly," Rowena smiled her fake smile. "Everything's just perfect." "Glad to hear it." I leaned back on the pillows, pretending to be tired. "I'm sorry, but I need to rest." "Of course, Father." Louis stood up. "We'll stop by tomorrow." When they left, I allowed myself a smile. They didn't know that I had seen everything. They didn't suspect that their treachery would not go unpunished. They thought I was a helpless old man to be tricked and used. But they forgot one important thing. I was a prosecutor for over 30 years. I've put hundreds of criminals behind bars, far smarter and more dangerous than they were. And if my own son declares war on me, he's going to get a war he never expected. I stared out the hospital room window at the gray Seattle sky and felt a cold resolve growing inside. A plan for revenge began to form in my head, as clear and ruthless as any trial I'd ever handled. This party they would remember forever. It will be the beginning of the end of their cozy world built on waiting for me to die. The day I was discharged from the hospital came on a cold Seattle morning. It was drizzling light rain, and the sky was covered with gray clouds, typical fall weather for these parts. Dr. Chen entered the room with a clipboard in hand and a concerned expression on his face. "Mr. Thorpe, I've reviewed your latest labs. Your vitals are stable, but I'd recommend staying a couple more days for observation." Thank you, doctor, but I'd rather go home, I replied firmly. So, believe me, I will follow all your recommendations. He sighed, clearly disapproving of my decision, but didn't argue. At my age, doctors treat you like an unintelligent child or a senile old man, not an adult capable of making decisions. In that case, here's a list of medications and their regimen. He handed me the prescriptions. And here's a note about what to avoid. No exercise, no stress, no alcohol. Next appointment in a week. I nodded, folding the papers into a folder. Is someone coming to pick you up? The doctor asked. In your condition, I wouldn't recommend taking a cab. My son, I lied. In fact, I had already called a private driver through an app on my phone. I needed time to think before meeting Louis again. When the doctor left, I slowly got dressed. It was still a little painful to breathe, and movement was difficult. 75 wasn't the age to recover quickly from a heart attack, but I was determined not to show my weakness, especially now that I knew about my son's plans. The driver was waiting at the main entrance, an older man about my age, in a neat suit and with impeccable manners. He helped me into the car and carefully closed the door. Where are we going, sir? He asked me as he made himself comfortable behind the wheel. I gave him the address, but not my house. Instead, I asked him to take me to a small cafe in downtown Seattle, near the courthouse, a place where my old friend Richard Farnsworth and I used to frequent. On the way out, I checked my cell phone. 3 missed calls from Louis and a message. Dad, I'll pick you up at the hospital at 2 o'clock. Don't do anything stupid. You can't be stressed. It was 1:30. I didn't have much time left. When we pulled up to Martha's Cafe, I asked the driver to wait. The little place hadn't changed much in the years I hadn't been here. Same wooden tables, same worn leather couches, same smell of freshly ground coffee and pastries, and the same Richard Farnsworth, sitting in the far corner with a newspaper and a cup of black coffee. Richard noticed me before I even reached his table. He stood up still stately in his 73, though his hair had turned gray and his face was wrinkled. Holden, you old fox. He shook my hand firmly. You look terrible. A heart attack doesn't make anyone look good, I said, sitting down across from him. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. For you, any time. He looked into my eyes. Your call sounded alarming. What's wrong? I glanced at the waitress who was approaching our table. Coffee, please, when I said, decaf. When she stepped away, I leaned closer to Richard. I need your help. Professional. I've been retired for 10 years, he reminded me. And I retired from the DA's office 15 years ago, I countered. But some skills don't rust. Richard leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed over his chest. Spit it out. I told him everything. About the heart attack, about Louis and Royna's behavior at the hospital, about the way they'd searched my house, about the party they'd thrown. Richard's face grew darker with each word. Your own son? He shook his head when I finished. You know, Holden, I've seen a lot of family dramas in 40 years of service. But this one, I know. I took a sip of tasteless, decaffeinated coffee. Believe me, I don't like it any more than you do. But I can't just let them walk away like that. Not after everything they've said and done. What do you want me to do? Richard asked bluntly. I want information about Louis's financial situation, his dealings at the firm, anything that might be useful. Richard chewed his lip. I don't have access to police databases anymore, and following your son could be illegal. I'm not asking you to break the law, I assured him. Just use your connections, skills, experience. The information I'm looking for is mostly publicly available. It's just that I don't know where to look, and in my condition, you're manipulating me, you old devil, Richard grumbled, but there was a spark of interest in his eyes. What exactly do you want? For starters, to see if Louis's house is in foreclosure. Rowena mentioned something about debts and debt collectors. I also want to know if there's any bar association complaints against him, and maybe check his bank statements for the last 6 months. That last one is definitely illegal without a warrant, Richard pointed out. Only if you get caught, I smiled weakly. But you're right. Let's limit ourselves to legal methods, at least for now. He finished his coffee and glanced at his watch. Okay, I'll see what I can do, but I'll need time. We have time. I pulled a flash drive out of my jacket pocket. In the meantime, take a look at this. It's the security footage from my house. I want you to look through it and tell me if any of it can be used legally. Richard took the flash drive, twirled it around in his hands. "You've always been a prudent paranoid," he said with a wry smile. "Maybe this will save your life." My phone vibrated, a message from Louis. "Dad, I'm at the hospital. Where are you?" "I have to go." I started to get up. "My son is looking for me. I don't want him to know we met." "I'll get back to you in a couple days," Richard promised. "And Holden, be careful. If your son is desperate enough to want you dead for money, who knows what else he's capable of?" I nodded, realizing what he meant. Saying goodbye, I left the cafe and got into the waiting car. "To the hospital, please," I said to the driver. "And hurry up, we made it back just in time." I had barely entered the hospital lobby when I saw Louis talking to the nurse at the front desk. "Dad!" he shouted when he saw me. "Where have you been?" I was worried. "Out for some air," I replied. "The doctor said a moderate walk wouldn't hurt me." Louis frowned but didn't say anything. He helped me with the necessary paperwork for discharge and then escorted me to his car. "I'll take you home," he said, opening the passenger door. "Rowena's already there, getting your room ready." "That's very nice of her," I replied with fake gratitude. 3 days later, Richard called me on my cell phone. "We need to meet," he said without preamble. "I have information that can't be discussed over the phone." "I'm under house arrest," I replied half-jokingly. "Honest, I have a nurse who is really more of a probation worker. Find a way to get out. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock at Martha's." I agreed, though I had no idea how I would get rid of the vigilant Clara. But the opportunity presented itself. The next day, Louis called and said he'd pick Clara up for 2 hours. She had to take some kind of medical test to renew her license. As soon as they left, I hailed a cab and went to the cafe. Richard was already waiting for me there, in the same place with a thick folder on the table. "You're late," he muttered instead of greeting me. "It's not easy to run away from your own home." I sat down across from him. "What did you find?" Richard opened the folder. "First of all, your son's house is mortgaged to the hilt. A second mortgage taken out 8 months ago. Plus 3 credit cards maxed out. Last year's IRS debt. They're up to their eyeballs in debt." He showed me copies of the paperwork. I looked at the numbers and whistled. How did they get into this kind of debt? "Lifestyles beyond their means," Richard shrugged. "Expensive cars, country club memberships, first-class travel. Plus, according to her credit card statements, your sister-in-law has a weakness for designer goods." Now let's get to the fun part. He pulled some printouts out of a folder. "I showed your son's records to a former colleague in financial crimes. Without names, of course. In his opinion, your son was involved in at least 2 cases of securities fraud and 1 case of hiding client assets during divorce proceedings." I took the printouts. They were transcripts of conversations between Louis and Nigel and other coworkers during the party, made from my camera footage. They mentioned deals with companies I'd read about in the news, all involving financial scandals. "Could this be used in court?" I asked. "Not likely," Richard shook his head. "The recordings were made without their knowledge, and the evidence is circumstantial. But it's more than enough for the Ethics Committee of the Bar Association to start an investigation, especially if you add this." He held out another document to me, a printout of an email from Louis to one of his clients, advising on ways to hide assets from his soon-to-be ex-wife. "Where did you get this?" I looked at Richard in surprise. "I still have friends in the right places," he replied evasively. "The main thing is that it's enough to file a formal complaint. Your son could lose his law license and probably face a criminal investigation." I set the papers aside, feeling mixed emotions. On the one hand, I felt anger and a desire for revenge. On the other, he was still my son, no matter what he did. "There's one more thing." Richard pulled the last document out of the folder. "The insurance policy on your life. Your son took it out 6 months ago. $5 million. I stared at the copy of the insurance policy, not believing my eyes. But how? I didn't sign it." Richard tapped his finger on the document. "Pretty crude if you ask me. But the insurance company didn't notice." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. A life insurance policy. Forged signature. It's no longer just waiting for me to die. It's actively wanting to hasten it. "What are you going to do?" Richard asked. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "Achronim, what I have to do. Use everything you found to defend yourself and punish them for their betrayal." "It could ruin your son's career," Richard warned. "He made his own choice. I replied firmly. And now he must bear the consequences. Richard nodded and handed me a folder. It's all here. Use it wisely, Holden, and be careful. People who are cornered can do desperate things. I took the folder, thanked Richard, and left the cafe. It was getting dark outside and it was starting to rain. I pulled up the collar of my coat and headed for the cab stop, clutching the evidence folder to my chest. Now I had everything I needed to take action. The plan for revenge was taking shape in my mind. Louis and Rowena wanted me dead for money? Well, they'd get what they deserved instead. Justice. The cold, merciless justice I'd served all my life. The week after my meeting with Richard was spent in careful preparation. I had to proceed with caution. Clara kept a close eye on me, and Louis and Rowena called and stopped by regularly, pretending to be concerned about my health. With each visit, my resolve only grew stronger. Their fake smiles, their feigned concern, all of it only made me more certain that they deserved payback. But revenge was a dish to be served cold, and I wasn't about to act in a hurry. The first thing I did was to contact Bennett Hawthorne, an attorney with whom I had never worked before and of whom Louis knew nothing. The meeting took place at my house. I cited my ill health and asked the lawyer to come to my house. I sent Clara to the drugstore to get some new medicine that Dr. Chen had supposedly prescribed, thus buying 2 hours. Hawthorne turned out to be a gaunt man in his 60s with attentive gray eyes and a reputation as a bulldog in legal circles. From the first minutes, he gave me the impression of a man who would not tolerate any pressure or manipulation from my son. "So, Mr. Thorpe, what can I do for you?" he asked after we had exchanged formal pleasantries. "I want to change my will," I said bluntly, "and I want to make sure it won't be successfully contested." He nodded without showing surprise. "What changes do you plan to make?" I.e., radical. I handed him a folder with the outline of the new version. "My only son will no longer be the primary heir. Instead, most of my estate will go to the Second Chance Foundation, a charity that helps ex-convicts re-enter society." Hawthorne took a quick look at the documents, then looked at me carefully. "You have a good reason for this decision, I assume?" "More than good reason." I turned on my tablet and showed him a few snippets of surveillance footage of Louis and Rowena discussing my imminent death and the division of my assets. "This is only a small piece of evidence." Hawthorne's face remained impassive, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I can see that. In that case, we'll need to take further action. Your son will probably try to contest the will on the grounds of incapacity, given your recent heart attack." "That's what worries me," I nodded. "He's already tried to hint to the doctors that I have cognitive problems. In that case, we'll prepare a detailed medical evaluation to confirm your competence. I know a number of highly qualified specialists whose opinion will carry weight in court." We discussed the details of the new will. I left the bulk of my estate, about 70%, to a charitable foundation. 20% was to be distributed among distant relatives with whom I rarely spoke, but who had never shown any interest in my money. And only 10% was left to Louis, enough so that he couldn't claim I'd completely disinherited him, but not enough to pay off his debts. "It'll be ready in 3 days, Hawthorne said, gathering the papers. "I'll send a notary to get it done properly." "Thank you." I walked him to the door. "One more favor. No information to Stuart Green, my former attorney. He's too close to my son." Hawthorne nodded understandingly and left a few minutes before Clara returned. The next step was to set the stage for a blow to Lewis's professional reputation. I needed to act in such a way that no one would suspect my involvement, to make it look like an accidental revelation of his questionable practices. Richard helped me draft an anonymous letter to the bar's ethics committee. To it, we attached transcripts of Louis's conversations from surveillance tapes disguised as recordings accidentally made by one of the party guests. We also added copies of documents that Richard had obtained through his channels, evidence of Lewis's illegal dealings with the firm's clients. The package was sent without a return address, and in the letter itself, an anonymous whistleblower expressed concern about the unethical practices of one of the partners at Price, Kinnick & Associates. At the same time, I prepared a second set of documents for Nigel Price, the firm's senior partner. It included only those materials that dealt directly with Louis and his dubious dealings, but did not involve Nigel himself. I knew this type of man well. Price would rather sacrifice a junior partner than risk the reputation of the entire firm. I sent the package by courier, identifying the sender as an anonymous friend of the firm. Price might suspect my involvement, but he couldn't prove anything, and the material would be too serious to ignore. Both packages were sent on the same day Louie and Rowena went to Portland for the weekend, ostensibly to vacation. But actually, I learned from Richard to meet with a potential lender who could help them refinance their debts. On Monday, I finalized the new will. Hawthorne sent a notary, an elderly woman with an impenetrable face, who carefully watched me sign each page and then sealed the document with her seal. At the same time, I received a medical report from a specialist confirming my full legal capacity despite my recent heart attack. And so everything was ready. All I had to do was wait for the time bomb I had planted on my son's career and financial well-being to go off. It didn't take long. On Wednesday, 3 days after the compromising materials were sent, Louis called me in a state of near panic. "Dad, I'm in trouble." His voice sounded tense. "I need to talk to you right away." "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to sound concerned. "Not on the phone. I'll be there in an hour." I agreed and hung up, feeling strangely satisfied. The plan was starting to work. Louis arrived even earlier than he'd promised. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his tie loose, his hair disheveled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it with nervous tension. "What's going on, Father?" he asked without preamble once we were alone in my office. I sent Clara shopping, saying I wanted to be alone with my son. "What are you talking about?" I acted puzzled. "Don't pretend," he almost growled. "The Ethics Commission has opened an investigation against me. Price had gotten some material that supposedly proved I'd violated attorney ethics. 3 clients have already turned me down. Is this your doing?" I looked at him calmly. "Why do you think it's me?" "Because no one else would have a motive?" He started pacing around the office. "Someone sent the commission and Price the tapes of my conversations. Private conversations? Who could have made them but you?" "Sit down, Louis," I said calmly. "You don't look good as a prosecutor, especially under the circumstances." He reluctantly sat down in the chair across from my desk, still seething with anger. "What circumstances?" I turned on the computer and turned the screen so he could see. Then I started up the video, the one where he and Rowena were searching my house, discussing how to divide my estate when I died. Louis turned pale. "Where did you get this?" "I'm paranoid, remember?" I smiled weakly. "CCTV cameras all over the house. They recorded not only that, but your adorable party while I was in the hospital." I switched the video to a snippet from the living room, where Louis and his co-workers were laughing at my professional awards, discussing the sale of the house after my death. "Were you following us?" His voice shook with rage and humiliation. "I was securing my house," I corrected. "Shakunadu, that you and Rowena decided to use it as a place to party and discuss my imminent demise was your decision, not mine." Louis clenched his fists. "What do you want? Money? I'll give back everything I took. Just get those accusations out of my head." I shook my head. "It's not about the money, Louis, and I can't make anything go away. The Ethics Commission got the material from an anonymous source. Even if I wanted to withdraw the complaint, it's impossible." "Don't play games with me." He slammed his fist on the table. "I know it's you. Are you trying to destroy me? For what? For what?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Are you really asking why? After planning my death, discussing the sale of my house, mocking everything that was important to me?" "I didn't plan your death," he exclaimed. "Yes, I said stupid things. Yes, I threw a party when I shouldn't have. But I never wanted to hurt you. And the $5 million insurance policy with the forged signature?" I asked quietly. "Isn't that wishing you harm too?" Louis froze, his face turning ash gray. "How do you know?" "I have my sources." I leaned back in my chair. "So don't be a hypocrite, Louis. You were waiting for me to die so you could pay off your debts. You were counting on my inheritance to continue living beyond your means." "It's Rowena." His voice dropped to a whisper. "She insisted on the insurance. Said without that money we'd lose the house, the cars, everything. We're in debt, Dad. Serious debts." "I know," I nodded. "Your house is in foreclosure. Credit cards are maxed out. Tax debt. And that's on top of your 6-figure salary at the firm. Where does all the money go, Louis?" He covered his face with his hands. "Rowena. She has her own ideas about how we should live our lives. Status, parties, clothes, jewelry. I couldn't say no. And then the debts got bigger, and I started looking for ways to make more money, even if it meant breaking some rules. Rules? I shook my head. You were breaking the law I dedicated my entire life to. You cheated clients, manipulated documents, used insider information. You dishonored not only your name, but mine as well. Louis looked up. There was a mixture of anger, fear, and despair in his eyes. And now what? You got what you wanted. My career is ruined. Price suspended me pending the outcome of the investigation. Clients are leaving. What's next? I've changed my will, I said in a steady voice. The bulk of my estate will go to charity. You'll get 10% enough to start a modest new life, but not enough to pay off all your debts. He turned even paler. You can't do that. I already have, I shrugged. The papers are signed and certified. I have a medical certificate of legal capacity, so don't even try to argue on the grounds of my health. Louis jumped up, knocking over his chair. You ruined my life. Because of one party, because of a few stupid conversations. No, Louis, I shook my head. I was just showing you the consequences of your own actions. You ruined your own life. Your greed, your disrespect, your illegal actions. I only lifted the veil. Rowena will leave me, he whispered. When she finds out about the will, about me losing my job, she won't stay with a bankrupt. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity for my son. But then I remembered how he and Rowena had discussed my death, how they had mocked my life, how they had treated everything I held dear. Maybe it's for the best, I said. If she's only with you for the money, is she worth regretting? Louis looked at me with hatred. You've always been cold, Father, always putting your principles before people. Even with Mom, you were like that, right to the bone, unable to understand other people's weaknesses. She loved you in spite of that. Don't you dare talk about her. My voice turned icy. Not after you and Rowena desecrated her memory by throwing a party in our bedroom, trying on her clothes, making fun of our pictures. Louis looked away, unable to bear my gaze. What am I supposed to do now? He asked quietly. Where do I go? It's your choice, I answered. You can cooperate with the ethics board, admit your mistakes, maybe keep your law license on probation. You can start a new life, more humble, more honest. Or you can continue down the same path and end up behind bars. You'd like that, wouldn't you? He grinned bitterly. For your son to go to prison? No, Louis. I shook my head. Despite everything that's happened, I don't want that. I'd like you to realize the cost of your actions, to change, but I won't protect you from the consequences. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I understand. This is your revenge. And it worked. It's not revenge, I countered. It's justice. I've served it all my life, and I'm not going to change it now, not even when it comes to my own son. Louis headed for the door, but stopped on the threshold. You know what the worst part is, Father? That even now, after ruining my life, you still think you're righteous. He left, slamming the door loudly. I was alone in my office, staring at the computer screen, where a shot of the party froze. The laughing guest, Rowena with a glass of my collector's wine. Louis showing someone my awards with a mocking comment. I felt not satisfaction but bitterness. But I didn't regret my actions. Louis should have realized that every action has consequences, that you can't wish your own father dead with impunity, break the law, betray the trust of your clients. That night Richard called me. How did it go? He asked. As expected, I replied. He blames me for all his troubles. No wonder, Richard chuckled. People rarely admit their guilt. What's next? Now we wait. The commission will investigate. Price will probably try to save the firm's reputation by sacrificing Louis. And my son. He'll have to find a new path in life. After the call, I sat in the dark for a long time, wondering if I'd done the right thing. Part of me, the fatherly part, was hurt that I had hurt my own son. But the other part, the part that had spent decades fighting for justice, knew there was no other way out. This wasn't just revenge for betrayal. This was a lesson Louis had to learn before his life would finally go down the drain. I didn't know if he would ever realize that and forgive me, but I knew I had done the right thing, protecting not only myself, but also those who might suffer from his unethical practices in the future. Thus concluded the first phase of my plan. Now I had to wait to see how events would unfold next. One thing I knew for sure, Louis and Rowena had learned a lesson they would never forget. For the next 3 months, I watched my son's life fall apart. I can't say I enjoyed it, more like the grim satisfaction of justice restored. Revenge tasted bitter, but I didn't regret my decision. After our conversation, Louis did not appear at my house. Clara, my supervising nurse, disappeared the next day. Apparently, she had been paid in advance, and with Louis's financial hopes dashed, there was no need to follow me. I was alone in my big house again, with the ghosts of the past and the shadow of a broken relationship with my only son. News about Louis came from a variety of sources. Richard, using his connections, kept me informed of the progress of the Ethics Commission investigation. Oliver Mitchell, an old colleague of mine, was reporting on conversations in legal circles. And the video surveillance system in my home captured one visit by Rajna, which I'll talk about later. The Ethics Commission worked surprisingly quickly. 3 weeks after I leaked the information, they issued a preliminary report, and it was devastating for Louis. He was accused of several serious violations of professional ethics: conflict of interest, withholding information from clients, using confidential information for personal gain, and soliciting false testimony from an expert. The commission recommended that his law license be temporarily suspended and that the records be turned over to the prosecutor's office for possible criminal investigation. Nigel Price acted even more quickly. A week after receiving the compromising materials, he called an emergency meeting of the partners, where it was decided to immediately suspend Louis and start the procedure of excluding him from the firm. Richard relayed to me rumors that Price personally met with his most important clients to assure them that the firm had nothing to do with my son's unethical actions. Rats are always the first to abandon a sinking ship, and Nigel Price was the kind of man who would sacrifice anyone to save his own skin. Louis's financial situation became critical almost immediately. Without the salary of a partner in a large law firm, with frozen client accounts and mounting mortgage debts, he was on the verge of bankruptcy. 2 months later, the bank began foreclosure proceedings on his house. I learned about it from Rowena herself. One rainy October evening, the security system notified me of a visitor at the front door. On the monitor, I saw her, without her usual makeup, wearing plain clothes that looked nothing like the sultry and arrogant woman I'd known before. I hesitated to open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Rowena entered hesitantly, as if she feared a hostile reception. "Hello, Holden," she said, stopping at the threshold of the living room. "Thank you for letting me in. To what do I owe this visit?" "Shannon," I asked, not asking her to sit down. She was fidgeting nervously with the strap of her purse, a cheap, non-designer purse like the ones she'd worn before. "Louis doesn't know I'm here. He wouldn't approve of—" she stammered. "I came to talk about what's going on." "Have a seat," I pointed to the chair across from mine. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thanks." She sat on the edge of the chair, her hands folded in her lap. "Holden, I know what you did, and why." I didn't deny the obvious. "In that case, you realize that you and Louis brought this on yourselves." Rowena nodded, surprising me with her agreement. "Yes, we did a terrible thing. The party, the talk of your death, the inheritance, it's unforgivable. But you have to understand, we were desperate. Desperation is no excuse for wanting your own father dead." My voice was colder than I intended. "I know," she lowered her eyes. "And I'm not making excuses. I just want you to understand that we've lost everything. The bank is foreclosing on the house. Cars have been repossessed. Creditors are calling day and night. Louis' license is suspended. His career is ruined." I had to quit the gallery. After the Louis scandal, the director found my presence uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," I said without feeling regret, "but every action has consequences." "I'm not asking for help," she added quickly. "Anarm, that's not why I'm here. I wanted to say—" Rowena took a deep breath. "I blame Louis for everything. He's the one who turned you against us." I raised an eyebrow. "Did he? I thought you were equal participants in everything that happened." "No," she shook her head. "The party was his idea, and the talk of your death. He was the one who always said that once you were gone, all our problems would be solved. He was a bad influence on me, Holden. Made me live beyond my means, put me in debt. And now he's blaming me for his downfall. I can barely keep from grinning bitterly. Typical of him to shift the blame, to make himself the victim of circumstances. Rowena, who had planned so enthusiastically to spend my inheritance, who had tried on Eleanor's coat while I was in the hospital, was now trying to convince me that she was just a pawn in Louis's hands. "Oh, what do you want from me, Rowena?" I asked bluntly. She looked up at me with a look of desperation mixed with calculation. "I've filed for divorce," and she said, "I can't be with him anymore. He ruined our life with his ambition, his greed, but I have nowhere to go. I have no savings, no job. I thought, maybe, maybe I could help you." I finished it for her. "Give you money for a new life? In gratitude for betraying my son as easily as you both betrayed me?" Her cheeks flared. "That's not what I meant. That's exactly what I meant." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Louis is to blame for a lot of things, but don't try to convince me that you were an innocent victim. I saw the tapes, Rowena. I've seen you talking about my death, planning to spend my money, mocking everything I hold dear. You deserve everything that happens to you." She stood up too, chin proud. "You're a cruel man, Holden. Now I understand why Louis always said you love your principles more than you love people." "And you love money more than people," I retorted. "And now that the money's gone, you're looking for a new source of funding. But not here, Rowena. Not with me." She left without a goodbye, slamming the door loudly, and I was left standing in the living room, feeling a strange emptiness inside. I had accomplished what I wanted to do. I had destroyed the lives of those who had betrayed me. But why was the victory so bitter? A week after Rowena's visit, Richard called me. "Did you hear the news?" he asked without greeting. "What news?" "Your son. He's agreed to cooperate with the DA's office. He's turning in all his associates, including Nigel Price. It turns out that the senior partner was aware of all the machinations and was getting his share." I wasn't surprised. In the back of my mind, I'd always suspected that Price was involved in Louis's dirty deeds, the kind of thing that rarely goes unnoticed in a firm, especially by the senior partners. "What's he in danger of doing?" I asked. "If the deal with the DA's office is approved, probably probation and a hefty fine. He'd lose his license for a few years, but he could avoid jail." I felt strangely relieved. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want to see my son behind bars. "And Price? He'll have it worse." Richard sounded satisfied. "He was in charge. He had more responsibility. Besides, according to Louis's testimony, Price was involved in much more serious offenses. He was looking at real time." After that conversation, I thought about Louis a lot. How he was as a kid, inquisitive, open, sincere. When did he start to change? When did ambition and greed supersede decency and honor? Was I too hard on him? Or not strict enough? Maybe Eleanor was right when she said I was working too much and spending too little time with my family. Late in the fall, when the first frosts painted the leaves in the park near my house red and gold, I made a decision. It was time to start a new life, to put the past behind me. Revenge had been taken, justice had been served, but it didn't bring happiness, only bitterness and emptiness. I contacted a real estate agent in Provence, France. For years, Eleanor and I dreamed of buying a small house there where we could spend the summer months after my retirement. Now I decided to realize this dream alone. The agent found the perfect option, a small stone house on the outskirts of the village of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, overlooking lavender fields and olive groves. 2 floors, terrace, garden with fruit trees, and space for a vegetable garden. Far from the noise of the city, from the constant reminders of betrayal and disappointment. I made the purchase remotely with the help of a solicitor. Then I contacted Hawthorne and made the final changes to the will. Most of it still went to charitable organizations, but I increased Louis's share slightly. Not out of pity, but out of a realization that he had a long road to recovery from what had happened. In early December, I received a letter from Louis, a real paper letter delivered by the post office. He wrote about his cooperation with the prosecutor's office, his impending divorce from Royna, the loss of his home and reputation. Not asking for help, not blaming me, just laying out the facts of his shattered life. There was one sentence at the end of the letter that made me think, I understand why you did what you did. If I were you, I would probably do the same thing." I didn't respond. Too much water had passed. Too deep was the wound of his betrayal. But I kept the letter. Perhaps someday I would be ready for reconciliation. But not now, not soon. In mid-December, I finished all the preparations for the move. I decided to leave most of my things behind. Too many memories, too heavy a burden of the past. I took only the essentials, a few photographs of Eleanor, a collection of rare law books I had collected all my life, and a box of my wife's letters. Everything else was to be sold and the money given to a fund to help victims of crime. The day before I left, I wrote a letter to Louis. Not a goodbye letter. I wasn't ready for a goodbye. More like a letter of explanation. I wrote about how I felt when I learned of his betrayal, about the pain, about the disappointment, about the anger, about how hard it was to see my only son waiting for me to die for an inheritance, about why I chose revenge, and how bitter that victory was. I didn't apologize for my actions, and I didn't offer forgiveness for his. Some things cannot be forgiven. You can only accept them and move on. I explained my decision to go to France, to start a new life away from painful memories. I pointed out where he could find a copy of the new will and assured him that I had not left him destitute, although most of the inheritance would go to charity. At the end of the letter I wrote, "I don't know if we will ever be able to rebuild what has been destroyed. Probably we won't, but I want you to know that despite everything that has happened, you are my son. And part of me will always hope that one day you will become the man I was once proud of." I sealed the letter in an envelope and left it on the desk in my office, next to the copy of the will and the house keys. Louis would get it all after I left. I had asked Hawthorne to deliver the papers a month after I moved to France. In the morning, I walked around the house one last time, saying goodbye to every room, every memory. The bedroom, where Eleanor and I had lived for so many years, was the one I lingered in the longest. Here her scent remained, her presence. It was also where I'd first felt the pain of betrayal, when I'd seen Rowena trying on my late wife's clothes. "I'm leaving, Ellie," I said aloud, addressing the void. "I hope you'd approve of my decision." I felt a light breeze touch my cheek as if she were there, as if she were answering my question. Perhaps it was just a play of imagination, but at that moment I felt peaceful. The cab arrived at exactly 9 in the morning. I took one last look at the house that had been the center of my life for so many years and got into the car. There was a long flight ahead, a new country, a new life. I didn't know what awaited me in France. I didn't know if I would ever forget the pain of betrayal and the bitterness of revenge. I didn't know if I would ever see my son again or what I would say to him. I knew only one thing. I had lived a long life, full of ups and downs, joys and sorrows, love and betrayal. And now at 75, I was ready to start a new chapter, with no expectations, no regrets, with an open heart and a clear mind. The cab pulled away. I didn't look back.